Larry Lala here. I want to talk to you about what law school is like, and more specifically, the way that students seem to cope with stress in law school and how that can hurt you. Now, last time we said we would cover three different things. How the fear of humiliation is maybe the biggest obstacle to your law school success, how you can more successfully cope with the fear, and how you can prepare without over-preparing. Really, I'm going to talk about this first point this time. This is something that people really don't get. And it's super important to make sure that you are not simply reacting to stress, but that you're adopting a conscious strategy in response to it. So let's recap really quickly. There are three main sources of stress. Pop. Piles of books, other students, and professors, and these work together in a kind of vicious cycle. Here's your pile of books, right? Here's a bunch of other students. Here's you feeling like Neville Longbottom in a sea of Hermiones and a brainy Smurf and a half-covered Velma. And here's a fear of looking like a fool before a totally intimidating professor. The combination of pop, piles of books, other students, and professors is a perfect formula for pressure to overwork doing the wrong things. The response to stress, to pop, often ends up being your mental general entropy telling you to train 10 times harder so you really hit the books, and then you end up as Boxer from Animal Farm. You think that the only way is to work harder, but remember that Boxer wasn't terribly bright and ended up at the glue factory. But there are very particular ways that our inner Boxers kind of show themselves. And they're in the form of three different coping strategies. They're basically read until you drop, write until you drop, or talk until you drop. What do I mean by this? Many students respond, they overwork themselves by rereading and rereading and rereading cases. Some students create work product to help understand the cases, usually in the form of case briefs. And some like to talk their confusion out with their study groups. Again, these are all mechanisms that involve the inner Boxer that copes with stress by almost mindlessly working harder, spurred on by this kind of harsh inner voice. I'm going to go into each of these three in more detail. Read till you drop. I mean, this is what you're up against. This is the seminal contracts case, sometimes the very first in your contracts class. And you're supposed to read this in preparation for class. So let's see what this is like. Reading. None of this makes sense. Reading. Reading. Oh, thank God it's over. Problem is, this isn't literature, so I've got to really understand all the aspects of this before I go to class. Oh God, I guess I got to start over. Reading. Okay, you see how that goes. You can kind of read the first time, but these cases don't really explain themselves. On first reading, you may not get a lot out of these cases. So what's your response? As a good student would, you keep reading. You go back to the beginning and you read the case over. And you keep reading. And you keep reading. And you keep reading and reading until you get it or you drop. Here's a question. And maybe this doesn't make sense to you if you haven't started law school, but a core question you need to ask yourself is, what is the virtue of reading something 4 to 5 times until you understand it? What's the learning value of making sense of something that doesn't make a ton of sense? Ask yourself, will the professor ever pat you on the head for saying, hey, you got it? And do you think without guidance that you'll know what's important with the case? Most importantly is the kind of meta-learning stuff. Do you even know what you don't know? What's the point of doing any of this? And will your professor help you with this? The problem is you can keep reading and reading and reading and reading forever. And that can prevent you from doing other things that might help you with law school. You can only pick a couple of weapons in your fight. Is it worth it just to read and reread cases? So that's one strategy. There's write till you drop. So maybe instead of reading and rereading and reading, what you do is you make work product to make sense of the cases. I mean, it's why we have the technology called writing. We forget things, and writing can help us kind of work through problems. So maybe you use writing to kind of bring the case to earth. At some schools, this form of making work product out of cases is mandatory for a little bit. It's unclear how they check, and it's called briefing cases. So what does this involve? A lot of it is identifying parts of a case. And these are sometimes the things that you're asked to kind of write down, or that is often thought to help. You kind of name who the parties are, you figure out if they're the plaintiff or the defendant, or if they're the respondent or the appellant or whatever. The issue is the thing that the court's being asked to decide. The facts or the entire background of the case. The procedural posture is specifically the case background, where it ended up in trial court, where it was appealed, and who's the one appealing right now. The holding is what the court decides on the main issue in the case. The rule is maybe a more abstract version of the holding, and it's maybe not something that is understood until the case is cited by another court. The analysis is kind of how a court arrives at its holding. The conclusion is often the same as the holding, and sometimes the dicta is reasoning, kind of hypothetical reasoning often, that is not part of the holding, but is part of the way that the court gets to its decision. Now, what is this? In my mind, it's really case anatomy. So one of my favorite images is dissecting a frog in class. You get to actually see the different parts of the frog. And in the lab practical, you said, where's the heart? Okay, where's the cloaca? Here it is. Where's the large intestine? Here it is. And in a way, this is all that case briefing is. So let's go back to our Hawkins versus McGee. Here's the very first page of the case. And what you can do is do the exact same thing. You point to different parts of the case and you identify the pieces. But let's compare again. Remember, this is what Hawkins versus McGee looks like in its entirety. Wouldn't it be nice to kind of impose a little order on that puppy? So here's a brief of that case written by some other guy. See, it's just a page, and looks like we've got the facts, the issue, the rule, the analysis, the conclusion. Oh, isn't that nice? Now we finally understand the case. Here's the thing about briefing cases. If you had unlimited time, this exercise may be useful. You don't. To make a single case brief this comprehensive, to really boil down what was a 5-page case into maybe less than a page, you need like 30 to 60 minutes. And you're not just reading one case per class, you're reading at least handfuls. Now, not all of them are long cases, and maybe you'll get a trimmed down version of that, but it takes a while to boil it down, even to this. Problem is, briefing cases can take all your time. As a law tutor, I have watched case briefing absolutely kill grades and law school dreams. My first 2 tutoring students, I'll never forget them. This is like almost 7 years ago now. They briefed cases to death, and they didn't get anything else done. In fact, briefing cases can be really seductive and dangerous. It's too mechanical an exercise. In my mind, it's too much of a crutch. It's like the drunk looking for his car keys under a lamppost. It's not because the keys are there, it's because there's light there. To me, case briefs create the illusion that you understand a case just because you can identify the pieces. Just because you can identify the pieces of a car does not mean you can drive it. Just labeling things does not help you think critically about a case, and more specifically, how to use it. I have a lot of other really well-documented problem with briefing cases. You can see my other videos on that. So, Next is talk until you drop. That's the third of the great coping mechanisms. Study groups. Study groups, they look like this. One of my favorite shows, Community, 6 seasons in a movie. I was in a study group in law school. They can help. The problem is, I think many people overdo it. This is what I think you can do with a study group. You spend 1 or 2 really focused hours discussing the issues or pieces of cases that you did not understand from class. You bring your heads together and you try to clarify things you don't understand. The other thing is, what you should really be doing, if you can avoid this, and just go to office hours and ask your teaching assistant or professors what's happening in class. Here's where it can go wrong. First, you can end up spending lots of hours together as a sort of mutual panic society. I don't know what's happening, neither do I. I don't know what's going on. Where you haven't each done the work and you're excessively reliant on the study group to understand what's happening. You could end up, I've seen this happen, with a giant group pissing contest where ostensibly it's about helping each other understand the law, but really you end up in a small group full of extra competitive people one-upping each other on what you understand and what you don't understand. The other thing that study groups can turn into is kind of, I don't even know if this is an adjective, procrastinatory social hour, where you get together and it can feel good to be able to bitch about, to go through something together, but if this isn't productive, then why are you doing it? You're spending way too much money to do stuff that's just relief in avoiding having to face the stress of what you're doing. So wait. Why are we doing this? Why are we using these coping mechanisms? The question that you need to ask yourself if you find yourself falling into one of these 3 great traps is, why am I doing this? Do I really know why I'm doing these things? Maybe you think it's being productive. For a lot of you, some kind of action, any kind of action, feels better than just sitting around and sitting with the stress. But then you have to question that action and ask yourself, is feeling productive the same thing as actually being productive? I want to go back one step further. Again, 74% of adults fear public speaking, but I think a lot of us who end up in law school, we're really used to working our fear away. Another thought is that exams are at the end of the semester, and sometimes the only feedback that we get is in class. Either we're on call and a professor says, "Good job, you got that," and you think to yourself, "Oh, that's it, I'm totally getting this." But you're not called on that much in any given semester. In a class of 100 people, in a section of 100 people, you're in a 14 to 16 week semester, you're not going to be called on that many times. You meet 3 times a week. Maybe you have 50 different sessions. What is that? Maybe you get called on 2 or 3 times this semester. Don't ask me to figure out that math. So most of the time you're just listening in, and you can passively watch someone getting grilled, and you're thinking of all the answers that person didn't come up with, and you get to pat yourself on the head and say, "I totally get that." So I think this is the line of reasoning for these kind of coping mechanisms. They're all aimed at helping us understand stuff to avoid humiliation in class. So the first thing is, we think, if I really get the reading using any of the 3 coping mechanisms we discussed, I'll be prepared for class. If I'm prepared for class, I won't be humiliated. If I'm not humiliated, I won't die. And then we make a further logical jump and say, hey, if I'm not humiliated, I must be doing well. Problem, nearly every step in this sequence is faulty. Let's just go through each line. If I really get the reading, I will be prepared for class. Okay, maybe, but remember, let's look at this. Let's really pick this statement apart. The emphasis here is like, I will be prepared for class. Let's say that you are. Ask yourself a deeper question. Is that the same as being prepared for exams? Do you know for sure that your strategy, your normal coping strategy, reading until you drop, writing, or talking until you drop, will help you with exams? Most students can't answer that question. Let's take the next step. If I'm prepared for class, I won't be humiliated. Now, remember that the Socratic method does not generate right answers. And let's say you're prepared for class. This doesn't mean that you won't mess up in class anyway. There's not a set of clear questions you're going to be asked. One of the cruelest things I heard my first year, my first semester, was someone who'd clearly done the reading in class and the student wasn't understanding the professor's line of questioning, and she said, "Oh, did you not do the reading?" That's really what she sounded like. And I thought this was super cruel because someone had done the work, and in her own passive-aggressive way, she was saying, "You don't get it." But I want to play this out. There are no right answers under the Socratic method. Let's take our little bit of Classroom Terrico. Tell me about Hawkins versus McGee. So remember in our other video, like Neville just flubs it, just totally incoherent. Let's say it's not like that. Let's say that Neville is totally prepared and gives this answer and tell me about Hawkins versus McGee. This is the seminal case on expectation damages. What does it mean to get what was promised in a contract? Here, a doctor promised a skin graft to make his hairy hand 100% good. The skin graft was bloody and painful and failed. Hawkins won his suit for breach of contract. He asked for damages, and the trial court awarded him damages for his pain and suffering. But the New Hampshire Supreme Court reversed, saying Hawkins was only entitled to expectation damages, the difference between a 100% good hand and his current, somewhat bloody, hairy hand. The court held that pain and suffering would have been part of the contract even if Hawkins received a 100% good hand at the end of surgery. So Hawkins was not entitled to recover for pain and suffering. Long bottom, what the shit was... Just kidding, that was perfect. Okay, do you really think it ends there? Yay! Thank you so much. This means this is what really happens. Hold on, we've still got 45 minutes. Argue the doctor's side. Do it well, or I will kill you. So, again, there are no right answers. You can answer everything perfectly right the first time, just nailing the professor's initial questions. The professor has to go on. There's always more to explore in a case. So, let's examine the last part of the reason. If I'm not humiliated, I won't die. And I want to kind of pick that apart. Let's consider two different scenarios. You are humiliated or you aren't humiliated. I want to emphasize that either way, this choice of options will only happen to you a couple times a semester, at most per class. Let's start with humiliated. Let's say you're humiliated. This is what's going to happen. Most people won't remember. They just won't remember you fluffing an answer. The few who do remember are way too petty to matter. And your professor, who occasionally will threaten that you will lose grades, your grade will drop if your class participation is bad, won't remember. The big sin is showing up unprepared, not fluffing it. A lot of people are nervous in class and mess up, but people lose, and only slightly, in terms of participation if they show up and they clearly haven't done the read. So not much happens. So let's see, what happens if you're not humiliated? Doesn't look that different. Most people won't remember. The few who are impressed by your in-class performance are really too petty to matter again. And your professor, whatever his threats to kind of help you, maybe pop your grade up half a grade with super class participation, probably won't remember. To me, this is the key. Good in-class performance is no indication at all of exam time performance. Can I emphasize this more? Can I be more pedantic? Think about this. Does talking well in class to alleviate your fear of humiliation help you with your grade? Remember how little you will be called on in class. So really the rest of the time is just mentally following in class show that you understand the material. The short answer is no. So what? Maybe your grade goes up or down slightly based on active in-class participation. But trying to get a good grade by preparing to talk well in class, by doing a huge amount of work to prepare to sound good in class, is a classic tail wagging the dog. This is not business school, which does grade you on in-class participation. The key question that you have to ask yourself is this: is my fear of humiliation going to drive me to take action that will boost my exam grades? If not, don't do it. So the fair question is, what the hell should I be doing then? Well, we're going to go back to those questions. How do you cope with your fear, and what's the right way to prepare for class then?